Everybody wants to be my friend. And when I make a new friend, I lavish my full attention on them. Why? Because doing so makes me look so good, of course. Here's my new best friend, Jess Stephens, an expert in Production 360. Hey Jess, let's show them what I just learned about Production 360. You ready? I'm gonna go clockwise, you go counterclockwise.
No, it's not like that.
Okay, you want clockwise? That's fine.
No, you don't get it. So that's not Production 360.
What is Production 360?
Well, Production 360 is a very simple concept. It's strategy that's supported by a theme, and that design is instrumental to from the beginning to the end and all the way back around again.
Looks like I got it wrong again. We're gonna have to edit that out. We still friends?
I'll think about it.
Okay.
So it's time to put away, at least put aside discussions of technology and virtual meetings and talk for just a little bit about messaging. Specifically talk about production. And joining us to talk about that is Jess Stephens, VP, Executive Director, Creative Services, PSAV. Welcome, Jess.
Thanks, Bill.
So I'm going to put away technology in the little black box and talk about messaging, because I think that it's important for planners to be confronting and dealing with content.
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about what's going on with content. I mean, do planners have a clear view of what they're creating and messaging?
That's a very interesting question, because I think that planners come from many different walks of life. How they became a planner, and when I say that, they may have come from an administrative side and got into planning. And then you have the planner that came from more of the marketing side and they got into planning. And those are two different types of animals, if you will, as to how they would approach planning. Planning is basically logistics, but the differentiator between planners is one that understands a message, understands that you don't put something in a room that doesn't resonate with the objective of what the meeting is trying to do. And there's planners that we have worked with that are very good at understanding that. Then there are planners that, whether they're new or not, we have found that that's not necessarily a criteria. It was more so what they understand the meeting to do. And some are great and some are not very good at. But that would be the differentiator with working with an agency like ourselves.
AV providers who can provide that kind of counsel are useful and important to a planner, because we talked earlier about the little black box of technology, the little box of content. You need both.
Yes.
We're not suggesting you don't need both, but on the other hand, we can't ignore the fact that messaging means a lot.
Yeah.
And I think that messaging often starts with an understanding of the audience, of what they're coming with and what you want them to leave with.
Yeah, it truly does. It really if you looked at the objective of what you're trying to do, that objective is built within that audience. It's always about what the audience is thinking, what they're feeling, and what they're believing. Now, there are perceptions with every audience before they even get into an event. From the time that you say go, and you say we're going to have an event, and we're going to send out an invitation, save the date, as an example.
Right.
You have already communicated a thought, a feeling, and a belief statement about that event, right? So when you kind of start breaking it down.
I'm just certain, let's stay with it. The thought is the intellectual part.
Yep.
There is a meeting, save the date. The feeling is the look of the piece. I mean, how I feel about go, or the subject matter. Is it?
A lot of people that have been to these meetings before already have an idea and a belief as to what this meeting's going to do. Some of them are apprehensive. So like the corporate side, we may have had a reorganization. They're apprehensive about going, right? So it's all about the communication tool as to how you prepare them to get into the event. Once they're in the event, now's your opportunity to capture them and to control what that think, feel, belief is going to happen throughout that experience that will then change their belief statement, hopefully focused on that objective. So imagine if my objective is to get 4,000 people to turn right at 1 o'clock on Thursday, then what are the components I have to build in there from a creative standpoint that's going to impact that message for them to turn right at 1 o'clock on Thursday?
And recognizing that your meeting may be comprised of a number of different segments. So not everybody's in the same place at the same time intellectually or philosophically, are they?
Correct. They aren't. And that's why when you speak to somebody or different groups of people, it could be, that intellectual side as well as the dynamics as to their age range and so forth that would change all of that. That's why you have to say things differently. You have to speak to them in multiple ways. It's not just one time. A conversation that you and I will have, we can feel that connectivity,
right.
For instance. If I was speaking to somebody else that may not have the same knowledge as you do, I might have to say it 2 or 3 times. It's the same thing within an event. That's an experience, right? So in an event, it's an experience too. So how do I take that and say it to them differently again and again and again? If I broke it down, there shouldn't be any more than 3 key messages in any one event because people just are not going to get it, right? And if you break that down, I have to say it probably 3 times. So now I have 9 times that I have to talk to an audience in order for them to get it because the dynamics are so wide.
And when we say event, do you mean the overarching event or maybe sessions within the event? Or they all work together, they all have to be cohesive?
They really need to be cohesive. So when you start talking about smaller events or breakouts, as we call them, in that messaging and that theming that should carry throughout. So you're making a connectivity, a continuous thread, and that's what we call a storyline.
Right.
And that storyline, if it's consistent, then you're going to capture your audience and they are going to do what the objective is.
And you'd said earlier about a corporate planner. Is it different for corporate and association planners in terms?
Oh, very much so. Just looking at the 2 different types of businesses. Associations are really there. They're wanting to build their association, right? That's how they survive. And they're really there to support their attendees. They provide them great education, materials, connectivity so they can share best practices. And that's where association wants to be able to grow their conference, right? A little bit different on the corporate side. When you talk about corporations, there are many different types of messages. It could be marketing, could be sales, could be reorganization as an example.
Could be bad news, yeah.
Which could be bad news or good news. Could be a celebration. It's how you approach those are all very different.
And the audiences are in very different places.
Right, the audiences. So the planner, as to how they approach that, should also be different. So if you're going to build the attendees in an association, your job is to make sure that you have enrollment, right? So how do we actually make the enrollment? How do you make the experience be committed so that next year they will enroll again, right? As opposed to corporations, they're being told to go. It's like you don't have a choice. You're going.
We're not asking you to save the date. You will save the date.
You will save the date, kind of thing. And that actually puts a little bit of apprehension with any attendee in a corporate environment.
It sounds like, because by the time you get a chance to do some of the things you do, or any AV provider for that matter, is it after the RFP's already been, have you been selected and now you're going? Shouldn't the RFP reflect everything you're talking about?
That's a very good question. This is the biggest mistake that most organizations make as a whole, is they will send out an RFP and none of the messaging will be in that RFP. What they're really trying to do, what they're trying to accomplish. They may talk about the association or the corporation, but they are really not talking about what they're trying to communicate within this event.
But is there a way for planners on their own, because unfortunately they can't get to an AV provider, or anybody for that matter, until the RFQ's out, unless you're working in your 2nd, 3rd year of a contract, which is the beauty of a long-term contract.
Yeah.
But is there anything they can do? You're saying think about your audience in terms of think, feel, and believe when you're organizing the meeting.
I believe internally they should be pushing the marketing arm of their organization to say, okay, we need to understand what your accomplishments are, what you're really trying to do.
In a corporate situation.
In a corporate situation. Well, as well as associations.
Okay.
I think the associations are a little bit closer to what they're really trying to achieve, but I actually recently spoke to an association that didn't know. And we're talking to the vice president of events, and she doesn't know what they're trying to accomplish. Very disconcerting.
Well, yeah, it guarantees you an RFQ that's all executionally based and linens and food and not the idea.
It's a logistics side of the business.
Right.
And some associations or corporations are very heavy on the food. They want a pretty room. They're not really about the message, you know. As an example, I was speaking to a CEO of a major organization, remain nameless, but I asked him, I said, what's your ROE? And he looked at me like, and I said, it's like ROI. We call it ROE, return on event versus return on investment. And he said, well, I don't know what you mean. And I said, well, why are you doing this event? He says, well, we've always done this event. I said, okay. Well, what are you really trying to get out of this? I mean, how do you measure what is being done here to know that what you're really trying to do with this message is communicated? How do you know? And he goes, well, sometimes our sales go up, sometimes it doesn't. And I was like, okay, so you're going to spend, I mean, I'm just, putting it out there, but you're going to spend a couple $1 million doing this event, and you don't know what the return on investment is. Boy, his eyes just rolled back in his head.
That's
because think about it, every CEO approves a marketing budget, right? And it's going to be a marketing campaign.
And a CMO as well.
Right, CMO. And I've had those as well.
Right.
Where they're talking about this and they go, oh my gosh, you're absolutely right.
I just want to end with the thought of how planners can approach this. Tips, ideas, where do they turn? Any thoughts on how they can make the first step to start bringing this kind of thinking into their organization? Is there some structure or somebody they should reach out to? Or?
Yeah, there is. It's interesting. The planners, I think, typically work in a frame that they've got a lot to do. Like you said, they have multiple hats. And I can tell you, in a lot of ways, I would never want to be a planner because they have so much to do. There's so much burden on their shoulders. I think the burden gets a lot easier as to what they are doing. Probably some of it they don't even have to do. As long as they partnered with someone from, let's say, marketing or sales, to understand what that objective was. If they buddied with someone in their organization or the association in marketing and say, work with me, help me understand what you're trying to accomplish, they're going to get a lot out of that. The other thing is, let's say they're going out to a company like ours, as an example, and they said, we need to work with a company that understands marketing, understands messaging, understands theming, and what our objective is and how to make that work with our objective. There's not a lot of companies that do that, but there are great people out there, great companies that do. They're just probably a lot narrower,
right?
And it's finding those. Those are jewels that are sitting out there, and you find those guys and you keep them real, real close, because that will make the difference to your event.
And I think this goes beyond, and then we'll wrap it up, Jess. Content, because content can be just stuff, and that's not what you're talking about. You're talking about strategic thinking and really thinking about your messaging, your theming, as you say.
Right.
Content is an output of that, as is technology, but first think about theming.
Well, perfect example. We're going to go to the Rocky Mountains, right, up in Vail to do an event. And guess what? Our icon, we hate to call them the branding, if you will. We hate to call them a logo because it has a very short-lived life. That icon is a Rocky Mountain. How about that?
Wow,
right?
just where we'll be.
Right, just where you'll be. Now that is really a lousy way in our understanding and study that you brand a meeting, because it doesn't speak to what you're trying to do at all. What you should be doing is taking that objective and saying, okay, let's build the messaging out of that and make an icon that supports that.
Right.
So all the design components come together. The PowerPoint template, the video design and graphics, the script writing, the entertainment, the keynote speaker, all these components. It's like a race car.
Right.
You design a race car to perform, right? It's the same thing with designing a conference. And if you don't understand all those components and how they work and what the personalities will be that come out of it and the expressions, then you're going to lose your audience. And that will, number one, make your association grow and your organization stay on track with what you're trying to do.
Perfect. Thank you. You had a great line for that, by the way. If it's just the logo of the place you're going, it's just a party, I think was what you said.
Yeah.
It's just a party.
It's just a party. Yeah.
Great. Jess, thank you so much.
All right.
We've been speaking to Jess Stephens about Production 360. More importantly, we've been focusing on content, which is a crucial part of how to develop a theme for your event. Jess, thank you very much.